Hi, I'm Dawn and this is where Shabby meets Bling. Tonight, all of our projects are going to revolve around clay because we're going to make our own clay stamps and clay cutters. No more buying those expensive fancy ones anymore because we're making our own. This is a Midsummer Creator's Choice. I would like to thank my co-host, Monica from Up All Night DIY. You're going to find the link to her channel and this playlist in my description box below. Project number 1, custom lace stamps. I am starting with a scrap piece of Luan, and if you don't have something like this laying around, don't go out and buy it. What you could use is an old ruler or a yardstick or even some really dense cardboard. Even corrugated plastic would work, like an old sign, that type of thing. Anything at all that you might have laying around that you're not using. Make sure it's nice and smooth. If it's not, give it a good sanding before you begin, and then you're gonna coat it with a very healthy coat of the Podge. And at this point, matte is fine, whatever you have the most of, just get it a nice coat of Mod Podge, and then we move on to the next step. Yes, we do. I will be using a crocheted cotton lace from burlapfabric.com. I'll leave their link in the description box. Now, you can use any lace you want as long as it has a deep relief. You want to make sure that this is going, because this eventually is going to get pressed into clay. So it needs to have something to make an impression, a deep impression. And this beautiful lace does. I'm using 3-in-1 glue to glue it right to the very tippity top of that piece of Luan that we just got done coating with Mod Podge. Make sure you get it glued on there well. You want it straight and you want every bit of the lace adhered to your board, whatever board you are using. I am making sure that I get even the little tips of that pretty detail on the lace glued down. And when I get to the end, I take the lace, I cut it, and I make sure it is glued right on the edge of the board, so we don't make any odd impressions when we actually do put this into the clay. And once everything's secure, we're gonna let this dry overnight before we continue. My lace is secured to the Luan and it is dry. So now I am going back over it with a gloss Mod Podge, and I'm making sure I get into all of the little indentations all over this lace. Everything needs to be coated and coated well. You are sealing this up so that when this does get pressed into clay, it's not gonna stick to the clay, because that would be bad and we don't want that. So make sure you hit this and you hit it good with a gloss. Remember, this step is gloss Mod Podge. You may need to apply more than one coat to make sure it is properly covered. Then you're gonna set it aside and let it dry thoroughly, because if it's not totally dry, we can't use it in our clay. So even if you set it aside a couple days, that's just fine. If you're not aware, this is my clay of choice. It is called Flower Clay by Nara, and it is recommended for sculpting flower petals. But the cool thing about it is that when dried, it can bend and twist, which is pretty darn cool. And when active, it can adhere to itself without glue. But I use cornstarch most of the time when I'm using my flower clay, and that being said, it won't stick to itself unless you add a little bit of water, and then it will again. But this stuff is amazing. You can reactivate with water and put it back into a bag, a plastic bag, so there is a minimal waste. Very little waste with this product. I love it. I picked mine up at Hobby Lobby. You can get it online, I'm sure. I just know I get it at Hobby Lobby, and I always get it when it's on sale for half off because I'm thrifty. Back to the clay and the job at hand. Once you have rolled out your clay in a nice, thin, and as straight as possible strip, you're gonna lightly brush it with cornstarch. Then you're gonna lay your stamp down and you're gonna press it evenly all the way down the line, all along your stamp. And then when you pull it up, this is what you get. How pretty is that? Seriously, isn't that lovely? Depending on what lace you use, you could have a stamp that nobody
nobody else has. And how cool is that to have something so unique and individual simply because you made it yourself from nothing, from scraps of whatever. But for now, we've got to trim up this piece of clay lace, and we're just going to trim the top of it, and then we're going to let it dry a little bit, just a little bit, to get it a little firmer, so that way when we handle it, we don't lose our impression. We want a lace print, not a fingerprint. You may have noticed I made a two-sided stamp. I put a different piece of lace trim on the opposite side, so that way I have double the design power in one stamp. To see how I finished the clay lace, I will leave the project video link in my description box, but here is a little bit of a sneak peek. I painted them to look like aged metal with a beautiful patina, and then I added them onto old furniture springs. Project number 2, custom two-sided stamps. First, I sketch out what our stamp is going to be on paper. I cut it out, then I transfer it over, just tracing it onto a thin piece of cardboard. Then I cut my cardboard image out. I flip it over, trace it again, and that way I have 2 mirror images of the same cardboard cutout. What I'm making is a two-sided cherub wing, and I need a pair of wings if she's gonna fly, don't I? I want my wings to look like they have feathers, like they're real wings. So I'm just using a marker to draw out where my little wing pattern, my little feather pattern, is going to be. I need to make sure whatever I draw on one little wing is the exact opposite, a mirror image of the other wing, because these will be the different sides, the left side and the right side of the same wing. And when it's all said and done, I will make 2 little wings, both double-sided. Once I have my patterns drawn, I bust out my hot glue gun with a fine tip nozzle, and I will trace all of my lines with hot glue. This will give me a nice deep line and will make an impression when this eventually becomes my stamp. Once my hot glue dries, I cover the entire wing in gloss Mod Podge. Now to the flower clay. I have already rolled out a nice sheet, and I have dusted it with cornstarch. I lay one of my little wing stamps on one side, I cut it out, and then I will take the other little wing and I will sandwich it right on top, making sure I'm lined up with my other wing. I double check to make sure they are even, and I gently press. You don't want to press too hard because you will go right through the clay. So very gently press, then you'll pull off both of your little stamps, and this is what you get. A two-sided cherub wing. Now we need to let them dry for a little bit and trim them up, and then they will be complete, ready for paint. To see how I finished off these beautiful little cherub wings, I will leave the link to the project video in my description box, but here's a sneak peek. There she is, my little Hershey's cherub. Isn't she cute? And you can see the dimension on both sides of those little cherub wings. Project 3, custom leaf stamps. This project is very similar to my cherub wing project. First thing I do is I draw out a leaf. I cut half my leaf out, I fold it over, and I cut around the part I've already cut out, so both sides are identical. My leaf is symmetrical on both sides. Then I make some other leaves and cut those out as well because I need a variety of sizes. Then with a normal sized nozzle on my hot glue gun, I create veins in my leaf. I didn't draw them out ahead of time, I am just winging it. Wherever I think there should be a little vein, I'm adding a vein, a hot glue vein. After I complete my veins and my hot glue is dry, I coat the entire leaf with 2 very healthy coats of gloss Mod Podge. The Podge. Once the Mod Podge is dry, we make our impressions in the flower clay. We cut out our little leaves, and then we are going to lay them out to dry in a very specific way. I want my leaves to have motion, so I have some propped up against items, I have some curved around items, and I'm going to lean some over the side of my little box. That way, once they dry, they will have the illusion of movement, of motion. Pretty much any item you can draw out and cut out, you can then make that item out of clay. To see how I finished my leaves, I will leave the project video link in my description box, but here's a sneak peek. This is Gus the Ghost Catcher, and as you can see, not only his hands and his feet are made from those leaves, but he has accent leaves on his head, by his stem, and around his neck. Isn't he cute? Project number 4, custom basket weave stamps. This stamp is a little bit different because this one actually is made with clay, and once again, flour clay, good old flour clay. I have put some cornstarch down, I have rolled out a nice piece of my flour clay, and now I'm cutting it into strips. Not really cutting it, more like making perforated lines. This is a pasta cutter without its handle that I thrifted for $1. You could use anything to cut strips, but I figured this is going to give me nice, even strips. And you can see I've had to use a lot of cornstarch, so the metal wheels on my little pasta cutter didn't stick. Now I'm just gently dividing out my little strips. And while they are still very pliable, I'm not leaving any dry time at all, I'm lining them up and I'm going to cut them so that they are all basically the same length. Now it's time to weave. I'm actually going to weave my little clay strips. And this is just like weaving anything, under, over, under, over. And you want it straight and you want it as even as possible. Take your time doing this because this is what your stamp is going to look like when you're done. So if your weave is crooked, your stamp's going to be crooked. Everything you do right now is going to reflect in the quality of your stamp. Now you can make this as large as you wanted to, depending on how long you make your strips. You can make a stamp that's 1 foot by 1 foot. I mean, that would take something, but you could do it. You sure could. So remember, over, under, then under, over, until you get a beautiful basket weave that you can create a stamp with. Once you've finished your basket weave, you're going to trim up the edges and set it aside and let it dry thoroughly. Here she is, totally dry, but be careful, your weave can still come apart. This is the front part of our mother mold to make our stamp. So we need to gently flip it over, like so. That's the best way I found to do it. And we're gonna dust off all of the cornstarch because we're gonna glue this. We're gonna glue this onto a cardboard square that I've already prepared. And if there's cornstarch on here, it's not gonna stick. The cornstarch would absorb your glue and there will be no glue to adhere it to the cardboard. So you really need to make sure you get all the cornstarch off. I am using 3-in-1 glue to glue the weave down to the cardboard. I've already applied a ton of 3-in-1 on that cardboard. Then I flipped my weave back over and sat it on top. Now I'm adjusting the weave. This is your last opportunity before that glue sets to get things lined up properly. You can make it tighter, you can make it straighter, because once that glue sets, this is permanent. Once you're satisfied with the look of your basket weave, you're going to glue down all of the edges. And once again, you're going to want to use a lot of glue. You don't want it to puddle up around your weave, but you want to make sure each and every little strip is glued really, really well to this cardboard. Once all the ends of your strips are glued firmly to the cardboard, you're going to set this aside and let it dry thoroughly. My glue is thoroughly dry, and now it's time for the very last step, and it's more Mod Podge. It's time to podge. I have the gloss Mod Podge yet again to seal my basket weave mother mold. This is what we're going to use to actually make our stamp. Now you're going to make sure that you hit the cardboard too, because the whole point is not only to seal up all the little nooks and crannies, but to apply a surface that's not going to stick easily to our clay. I applied 3 coats in total. And then I set them aside in between each coat and I let them dry. And how did I let them dry? Thoroughly. Back to my flower clay, I have rolled out a nice thick piece of clay. And I've dusted it with cornstarch. And I'm pressing in my mother mold. You want the clay thick enough so that your mother mold does not go through the clay to the mat. Press your mother mold in firmly and make sure you hit all of your 4 corners and the middle. And when you're done, this is what you get. This is your actual stamp. You will notice we made a reverse image of a basket weave. That way, when we press this into our clay, we will legitimately get a basket weave design. We are going to trim this up, get rid of all the extra clay. That way we don't waste it. Then we're going to set it aside and let it dry. And then we make sure, once again, that there's no extra cornstarch on it. We cut a piece of very sturdy cardboard and 3-in-1 glue our stamp to the cardboard. And then we're going to coat it in 3 coats of Mod Podge, gloss Mod Podge. I actually created 2 stamps, one with a little bit deeper impression. We're going to give this one a try. Just going to press it into our clay gently so we don't go through the clay. And then we're going to pull it up and see what we get. And we get a basket weave. We get a basket weave. I am making flowers with my basket weave, so they're little basket weave flowers. I'm using a fondant cutter. You can use fondant cutters, cookie cutters, or clay cutters, whatever your heart's desire, or just freeform it. But you could make anything that has a basket weave pattern. How pretty is that? To see how I finished off my basket weave flowers, I will leave the project video link in my description box, but for the moment, here's a sneak peek. I used my flowers on a Longaberger Basket Rescue Flip. Aren't they pretty? Project 5, a custom rickrack clay cutter. I thought this project would be appropriate because it is July and I'm gonna throw a little Christmas in July at you. I have this big spool of pallet strapping that I thrifted at a restore, and I love using this stuff. I've used it in so many projects. Well, now I thought, why not take it, bend it the right way, and create a cutter, a rickrack cutter, and that's all I'm doing here. I took a length of it. I am using a jewelry tool to form little bends in the pallet strapping. That little V shape that is so familiar and iconic with your rickrack, I am trying to form those all the way down the line. I need them to be uniform and I need them to be flush. If I were to set this down on the table, one end cannot stick up in the air, if you know what I'm saying. This thing needs to be nice and flush against the table. So I will work my way all the way down, taking my time until I get a long piece of what looks like metal rickrack. Once you have formed your cutter, you take it and you push it into your flower clay and then lift it up and push it in right below, leaving a little gap because that gap is what forms your rickrack. This is what you get. How cool is that? It's rickrack, but it's clay, and it's flower clay, which means it's pliable and bendable. Pretty darn cool. To see how I finished off my rickrack, I will leave the project video link in my description box. But for now, here's a sneak peek. This is Gingy, complete with a little charcuterie wagon. Check out his rickrack. He's pretty darn happy. It's Christmas. Well, at least Christmas in July. This has been Midsummer Creator's Choice. Thanks again to my co-host Monica from Up All Night DIY. You're gonna find the links to her channel and this playlist in my description box below.
I hope you'll try making your own clay stamps and cutters. There's a lot more to share, so I'll definitely be doing a part 2. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. But for now, I'm Dawn, and this is where Shabby meets Bling. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.